So to finish, let's have a quick look at how depth is created, but also what the limits of this way of thinking might be. Sassatelli argues that often, rather than simply consuming brainlessly, consumers are active in the act of consumption. They're also often decodifying, reinterpreting and criticising the PR, the adverts, the marketing, the products they consume. We're not just zombies taken in by every advertising board we see. She writes that consumption often consists in reframing the meaning and uses of material culture by translating the purely commercial value of goods into other forms of value. Affection, relationships, symbolism, status, normality, etc. She continues, saying that recent studies of audiences and media consumption show that spectators actively decodify messages and images, referring them to the context in which they are experienced, to their own social position, gender, life course, and so on. Take DIY. Yes, new tools and paints and furniture are advertised and sold to us, but they're often decommodified, made personal, adapted and decorated and fixed and things, and adorned with family photos or meaningful items in the home. This becomes a kind of decommoditized sphere, a personal sphere between family, between friends, at events and online. We use musical instruments to create new, individual, unique music. We paint and produce art and discuss and trade second-hand items on social media. We fill up photo books with personal memories. We give gifts. All of these things transcend the flatness of consumerism and bring in more personal, social, ethical, or transcendental ideals. In 1970, Baudrillard pointed to the typewriter that can write in 13 different fonts in a diction machine to record notes as examples of pointless gadgets. To me though, these seem useful. I use different fonts to convey different ideas or emotional tone quickly and effectively. It's another layer to language, and others find recording to remember important things easier than jotting them down. Sassatelli also points to how the Walkman was criticised when it was first released for representing alienation, anomie, and atomization, despite listening to music on the go clearly being representative of many other things: escape, heightened experience, resistance, creativity, energy. She also writes about the positive experience of connoisseurship, of collectibles and hobbies. She says, the pervasive allure of connoisseurship may be seen as having to do with mastering objects and demonstrating aestheticized detachment from them. By piling up a complex repertoire of knowledge, the connoisseur finds a way to get close to commodities while distancing him or herself from their immediate hold. Others have pointed to cinema, television, and image more broadly being deeper than is often assumed. In his book on Baudrillard, Adam Roberts writes that for Baudrillard, Vietnam was a war flattened and emptied out to a basic layer of violence, mixed in with popular culture and TV, accompanied in many people's imagination by a soundtrack of 1960s pop music. But the violence and death was not hyperreal or simulated. It was real. My point is, in amongst the problems we've identified with consumer society, which are deep and vast, and all of these thinkers provide a really useful and important framework for analysing them, everywhere we look at the same time, we can also find depth, meaning, usefulness, creativity, and connection too. And we can apply this seeking after all these things, after depth, to our understanding of how things like supply chains work, what we think is unethical and what we think is ethical, what we want to support and what we want to avoid, what we want to push to regulate, to organise against, to think against, to politically change. And I think this is the opposite of shallowness, of depthlessness, the opposite of alienation. But am I being naive? Am I ignoring other issues? The breadth and scope of the problem, the addiction to new fashions, pointless new purchases, pollution or child labour, say? I guess, at least in part, what I'm arguing is that if you look at the consequences of your purchases in depth, if you think about the message, the result, the meaning in your own and in others' lives, then you can become a kind of ethical consumer. But is this really true? Even as the term ethical consumption has become more popular, as we've become increasingly aware of the pitfalls of fast fashion and the environmental degradation of consumption, bottled water sales, to take just one simple example, have continued to rise and are projected to do so almost indefinitely. Palm oil, a major cause of deforestation, is still in half of packaged products. Fast fashion companies continue to pay below the minimum wage, even in so-called developed Western countries. Garment factories continue to burn down, and scientists still warn against climate change to deaf ears. But working out whether more conscious consumerism works at all is difficult to do. On the one hand, we continue to outsource to places like Bangladesh and see these tragedies that are the result of poor health and safety, terrible regulations and labour practices. But at the same time, the ILO, the International Labour Organization, says that child labour is down by a third since 2000, and 61% of fashion companies have committed to using sustainable fabrics. That is, when there's cultural pressure on manufacturers, on what we eat and wear, then there does appear to be some change. On the other hand, Northwestern University Professor Braden King has argued that boycotts have a negligible effect on a company's sales revenue. He says that the problem is we can't pay attention to any single controversy for very long. Yes, we talk about and we see news items on things like the tragic Rana Plaza building collapse in Bangladesh back in 2013 when over 1,000 died. We talk about it for a bit, but then we move on to other things. It gets quickly forgotten. And Terry Hathaway at the London School of Economics writes that even the most hyper-vigilant, well-informed shopper cannot know everything. The labour and conditions, the tools and the production of these tools, the raw materials and their extraction, the energy, etc., that goes into making even the most simple products. Instead, the consumer must buy in partial ignorance of all the factors, primarily on the basis of those attributes that are the most conspicuous, and to some degree based on trust. He continues, shopping at Whole Foods could be construed as support for higher welfare meat and organic agricultural methods, but it will equally support union busting, low wages for workers, and right-wing libertarian politics. So here is the crux of it. Our consumer society is messy, complex. It can both sustain us creatively and can destroy the planet. So maybe it is a useless concept. Well, I think we're better off thinking about it in its original sense, as consumer from the Latin, to use up, as not a noun, as something that just describes our society, but as a verb, as something we're all doing or can do or do at a certain time. And like anything we do, there's a chain of activity, social and historical and environmental and economic, that supports the consumption and that we in turn support by consuming. Only by studying the understanding of issues like this in depth can we grapple with these problems. Thinking about regulation, changing the economic system, organising politically, it's all a part of understanding these things in depth. And everyone's interpretation of what to do, what they think is justified, what they think isn't, will be different. But as long as you're exploring your own attitudes, looking at the consequences, I think that's okay.
And for many, like journalist Alden Wicker, ethical consumption just doesn't work. Instead, he argues, we should donate some of the money we would spend on consumption on going greener or on donations to NGOs and green politicians. But to me, this is part of ethical consumption. It's part of thinking broader, thinking more deeply about the issues. In the same vein, commentator Robert Reich has reminded us that when you hear a company boast about how environmentally friendly it is, hold the applause. Under super competitive capitalism, what I've termed super capitalism, it's naive to think corporations can or will sacrifice profits and shareholder returns in order to fight global warming. Firms that go green to improve their public relations or cut their costs or anticipate regulations are being smart, not virtuous.
So it's important to approach all this with a multifaceted attitude. Depth means more eyes on the issues. Depth means engaging with the politics. Depth means exploring our own desires and beliefs vigilantly. Taking an issue, something we consume, and understanding the ramifications. And this, doing some practical philosophy, trying to apply the things we've just learned, is something that I want to try and do next time.
Thank you as always for watching, and a huge thanks of course, as always, to my Patreons, without which this just wouldn't be possible. So if you want to see scripts, if you want to chat in the Discord server, if you want your name in the credits, but most of all, if you just want to help support, make this content, then click the link in the description below. If not, you can like, you can share, you can leave a comment, all those things that help the algorithm. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.